What if the biggest mistake of a man's life wasn't losing his fortune, but losing the family he never knew he had? On a warm Saturday evening in downtown Chicago, hundreds of guests gathered beneath crystal chandeliers for what was supposed to be the celebration of the year. Ethan Crawford stood at the center of it all, smiling for cameras, raising a glass beside his glamorous fiancée, Vanessa Blake. He had spent months planning this night. Every detail was perfect. The guest list was perfect. The venue was perfect. Even the invitation he mailed to his ex-wife was part of the plan. Because after 7 years, Ethan wanted Charlotte Hayes to see exactly what she had lost. He wanted her to walk into that ballroom and watch him succeed without her. He wanted everyone to see the woman he left behind. But there was one thing Ethan didn't know. Charlotte had never been the one left behind. As the orchestra played and conversations filled the room, the grand entrance doors slowly opened. At first, nobody paid attention. Then the room became strangely quiet. Heads turned. Glasses stopped halfway to lips. Conversations died in mid-sentence. A woman stepped inside wearing a calm smile that carried the confidence of someone who no longer needed anyone's approval. Beside her walked 3 children. A little girl, another little girl, and a boy. Triplets. 7 years old. Identical golden brown eyes. The same smile. The same unmistakable features. Features that looked alarmingly familiar. Charlotte wasn't supposed to be there looking like that. She wasn't supposed to arrive surrounded by executives, investors, and influential guests who immediately rushed over to greet her. She wasn't supposed to walk through the ballroom as if she owned the building. But the most shocking moment came seconds later. One of the children looked directly at Ethan, tilted his head, and asked the question that would send a chill through every person in the room. "Mom, is that our dad?" The color drained from Ethan's face. Vanessa's smile disappeared. And for the first time in his life, Ethan Crawford realized there were secrets money couldn't buy back. Because the woman he had invited to humiliate was richer than everyone in the room. The children standing beside her carried his last name without ever knowing him. And before the night was over, the truth hidden for 7 long years would force an entire ballroom to witness the price of arrogance, the weight of regret, and the moment one man understood exactly what he had thrown away. Charlotte Hayes stared at the cream-colored envelope resting on her kitchen counter for nearly 10 minutes before touching it. The elegant gold lettering on the front seemed harmless enough, but she already knew who had sent it. Some names carried a weight that years could not erase. Ethan Crawford was one of them. Outside her floor-to-ceiling windows, the Chicago skyline glowed beneath a fading sunset. 7 years ago, she would have admired that view from a luxury penthouse on the city's north side. Back then, she had believed she was building a life with a man who valued loyalty more than status. She had been wrong. Charlotte finally picked up the envelope and turned it over. The expensive paper, the embossed seal, the carefully chosen design. Everything about it felt like Ethan. Perfect. Calculated. Designed to impress. Designed to send a message. Her fingers remained steady as she opened it. Years of practice had taught her how to hide emotions, especially the painful ones. Inside was a formal invitation to Ethan's engagement celebration. The event would take place at one of Chicago's most exclusive venues. Hundreds of guests were expected. Business leaders, politicians, influencers, socialites, the city's elite. Charlotte read the invitation twice before setting it down. Then she laughed quietly. Not because it was funny, because it was predictable. Ethan had always loved an audience. Even when they were married, he never truly celebrated personal milestones unless other people were watching. Every achievement had to be displayed. Every success had to be witnessed. Every victory had to be public. The invitation itself was not surprising. What surprised her was how little it affected her now. There had been a time when seeing his name would have reopened wounds she spent years trying to heal. But that woman no longer existed. The woman who sat in the quiet luxury of her lakefront home was someone entirely different. Stronger, wiser, harder to break. A small voice interrupted her thoughts. "Mom, are we still going to soccer practice tomorrow?" Charlotte looked up and smiled. Noah stood in the doorway holding a soccer ball beneath one arm. Behind him, Emma and Olivia appeared moments later, arguing over whose turn it was to choose the family movie that evening. Instantly, the tension inside the room disappeared. They were the center of her world. The reason she kept moving forward when everything else seemed impossible. 7 years earlier, She had discovered she was pregnant less than 3 weeks after her divorce became final. By then, Ethan had already moved on. Publicly, confidently, without looking back. The announcement of his new relationship had spread across social media before Charlotte even had time to process the end of her marriage. She still remembered sitting alone in a small apartment, staring at the positive pregnancy test, while headlines praised Ethan's glamorous new life. She never called him, never sent a message, never asked for anything. Some people thought she was foolish for making that choice. Others thought she was protecting her pride. The truth was far simpler. She had seen who Ethan had become. A man obsessed with image. A man who viewed relationships as accessories to success. A man who believed every problem could be solved with money. She could not imagine trusting the future of her children to someone who treated people as stepping stones. So she walked away, and she never looked back. At least that was what everyone believed. "Mom," Noah asked again. Charlotte blinked and smiled. "Yes, we are still going to practice tomorrow." The triplets cheered before racing toward the family room. Their laughter echoed through the house. Charlotte watched them disappear around the corner and felt the familiar warmth that always followed. Success had changed many things in her life. It had given her opportunities, security, influence, but nothing compared to this. Nothing compared to hearing her children laugh. Her phone vibrated on the counter. A message appeared from her longtime friend and business partner, Rebecca Morgan. "Are you really going?" Charlotte looked back at the invitation. A few years ago, the answer would have been obvious. No. She would have thrown it away and forgotten it existed. But something about the invitation bothered her. Not because she cared about Ethan. Because she understood him. Ethan never did anything without a reason. He had not sent the invitation hoping for reconciliation. He had not sent it out of kindness. There was a purpose behind it. A hidden message. A carefully planned outcome. And deep down, Charlotte already suspected what it was. Ethan expected her to show up alone. He expected her to arrive as the woman he remembered. The woman who once doubted herself. The woman who once needed his approval. He expected an audience. A comparison. A victory. Charlotte picked up her phone and typed a response. "Yes, I think it is time." Seconds later, Rebecca replied. "Are you sure?" Charlotte looked through the glass wall toward Lake Michigan. The water reflected the final traces of daylight as boats drifted across the horizon. 7 years had changed everything. Not just her bank account. Not just her career. Her entire identity. She was no longer the woman Ethan left behind. She was the woman who built something extraordinary after he walked away. But there was one thing Ethan still did not know. One truth hidden from him for 7 years. A truth with 3 smiling faces sitting in the next room. Charlotte glanced toward the sound of their laughter and smiled softly. Then she folded the invitation, placed it back inside the envelope, and carried it upstairs. At the end of the hallway stood a large steel safe concealed behind a custom wood panel. She entered the code and opened the door. Inside were legal documents, family photographs, business records, and memories she rarely revisited. Charlotte carefully placed the invitation on an empty shelf and reached for a photograph resting beside it. The image showed 3 newborn babies wrapped in matching blankets. Tears immediately filled her eyes. Not from sadness. From memory. From gratitude. From everything they had survived together. She stared at the picture for several silent moments before noticing something tucked behind the frame. A faded photograph she had not seen in years. Slowly, she pulled it free. The moment she saw it, her heartbeat stopped. Because the image captured a day she had spent 7 years trying to forget. Charlotte lowered herself into the chair beside the safe and held the faded photograph in both hands. Time had softened the colors, but not the memory. She could still remember the exact moment it was taken. It had been a Sunday afternoon at a small lake outside the city. Back when life felt simple. Back when she still believed promises lasted forever. In the photograph, Ethan stood beside her with one arm around her shoulders. Both of them were laughing at something outside the frame. They looked happy. The kind of happy that only exists before reality reveals itself. Charlotte stared at Ethan's face for several long seconds. 7 years later, she barely recognized that version of him. Maybe because the man in the picture no longer existed. Or maybe because she had finally learned who he really was. Downstairs, the sound of the triplets running through the house pulled her back to the present. She carefully placed the photograph on her lap and closed her eyes. There had been a time when seeing that image would have broken her. Now it only reminded her of how far she had come. A knock on the open bedroom door interrupted her thoughts. Emma peeked inside. "Mom, are you okay?" Charlotte smiled immediately. "Of course I am." Emma stepped into the room. At 7 years old, she already had an instinctive ability to sense emotions others tried to hide. "You look sad." Charlotte opened her arms, and Emma climbed onto her lap. "Not sad. Just remembering some old things." Emma looked at the photograph. "Is that Dad?" The question arrived so naturally that Charlotte almost forgot how complicated the answer really was. She nodded slowly. "Yes." Emma studied the picture carefully. "He looks different." Charlotte could not help smiling. People change. Emma remained quiet for a moment. Then she asked the question Charlotte knew would eventually come. "Do you think he ever thinks about us?" Charlotte felt her chest tighten. Not because she lacked an answer. Because she had spent years wondering the same thing. Did Ethan ever think about the children he never knew existed? Did he ever imagine the family that could have been? Did he ever regret anything at all? She kissed Emma's forehead gently. "I do not know, sweetheart." It was the most honest answer she could give. Emma nodded thoughtfully before climbing down and running back toward the hallway. "Movie starts in 5 minutes." Charlotte laughed softly. "I will be right there." Once Emma disappeared, Charlotte looked back at the photograph. The question lingered in her mind. Did Ethan ever think about them? Maybe. Maybe not. Either way, it no longer changed anything. Later that evening, after the triplets had fallen asleep, Charlotte sat alone in her home office overlooking the city lights. Her laptop screen displayed quarterly reports from one of her investment firms, but she could not focus. Her attention kept returning to the invitation. Finally, she opened a desk drawer and removed a leather portfolio. Inside were documents most people never saw. Financial statements, ownership records, corporate structures. Years earlier, when she had started her first small consulting company, nobody expected much, including her. The business had begun from a spare bedroom, a borrowed laptop, and more determination than experience. She worked during nap times, during school hours, late into the night after the children were asleep. There were months when every dollar mattered. Months when she questioned whether she was making a terrible mistake. But every setback taught her something. Every challenge made her stronger. Over time, one company became 2, then 3. Investments followed. Partnerships followed. Opportunities followed. The woman Ethan once described as too quiet and too emotional had quietly built something extraordinary. Yet almost nobody connected Charlotte Hayes to the business empire she controlled. She preferred it that way. Attention had never interested her. Freedom did. Her phone buzzed. Rebecca was calling. Charlotte answered immediately. "You are still awake." Rebecca laughed. I was about to say the same thing. They spoke almost every day. Over the years, Rebecca had become more than a business partner. She had become family. "Tell me you changed your mind," Rebecca said. Charlotte smiled. "I did not." "Then tell me why you are really going." Charlotte leaned back in her chair. Outside, thousands of lights illuminated the Chicago skyline. "Because I am tired of hiding." Silence followed. Rebecca understood exactly what she meant. For 7 years, Charlotte had protected her children from questions, protected them from public attention, protected them from Ethan's world. But hiding and protecting were not always the same thing. "Do the kids know?" Rebecca finally asked. "No." "Will you tell them before the event?" Charlotte hesitated. "I think I have to." The thought terrified her more than attending the engagement celebration itself. The triplets knew very little about Ethan. They knew he was their father. They knew he and Charlotte had once been married. But beyond that, Charlotte had deliberately avoided filling their childhood with bitterness. Children deserved better than inherited resentment. Rebecca sighed. "Whatever happens, they have you." Charlotte smiled softly. "That is what matters." After ending the call, she remained seated in the darkness for several minutes. Then she opened her calendar and checked the date. 10 days remained before the event. 10 days before Ethan would see her again. 10 days before he would see the children. 10 days before secrets that had remained, buried for 7 years, finally reached the surface. As she prepared to shut down her computer, a new email notification appeared. The sender's name instantly caught her attention. Ethan Crawford. Her pulse quickened. Slowly, she opened the message. The email contained only a few sentences. Polite. Professional. But the meaning behind them felt unmistakable. Ethan personally hoped she would attend. He mentioned several mutual acquaintances who would be present. He wrote that it would be nice to reconnect after all these years. Charlotte read the email twice. Then a third time. By the time she finished, she was no longer smiling. Because buried beneath the friendly language was something she recognized immediately. Ethan was expecting a performance. He was expecting an audience. And somehow, after 7 years apart, he still believed he knew exactly who Charlotte Hayes was. What he did not realize was that the woman he remembered had disappeared a very long time ago. And in 10 days, he was about to meet someone entirely different. The email remained open on Charlotte's screen long after midnight. Most people would have seen nothing unusual in its carefully chosen words. Ethan had always known how to sound gracious when an audience might eventually be watching. But Charlotte knew him too well. She knew the difference between sincerity and strategy. She had spent nearly a decade learning that difference. The message pulled her backward through time, toward memories she rarely allowed herself to revisit. 7 years earlier, the end of her marriage had not happened all at once. It had happened slowly, quietly, like a crack spreading across glass, until one day the entire structure finally shattered. At first, the changes had been subtle. Ethan stayed later at the office. Business trips became more frequent. Conversations became shorter. Every disagreement somehow turned into evidence that Charlotte was holding him back. She remembered sitting across from him at dinner one evening while he scrolled through emails instead of speaking to her. The expensive restaurant overlooked the Chicago River. Other couples laughed and shared stories around them. Ethan barely looked up from his phone. "You have barely said 10 words all night," Charlotte finally said. Ethan sighed as if she had interrupted something important. "I am building a future for us." Charlotte stared at him. "A future where we never actually spend time together?" Ethan placed the phone down. His expression immediately hardened. "This is exactly what I mean." "What do you mean?" "You always focus on feelings instead of results." Charlotte remembered how much those words hurt. Not because they were true, because she had spent years supporting his dreams. She had celebrated every promotion, every contract, every victory. Yet somehow, she had become the problem. Looking back now, she understood something she could not see at the time. Ethan had already begun rewriting the story of their marriage long before it officially ended. In his version, he was ambitious. She was limiting. He was evolving. She was standing still. He was moving toward success. She was slowing him down. It was a convenient narrative, one that allowed him to leave without confronting the damage he caused. The final months became unbearable. Friends they once shared suddenly became Ethan's friends. Invitations stopped arriving. Social circles shifted. Charlotte often felt like a guest in her own life. The loneliness was not caused by being physically alone. It came from realizing that people treated you differently when someone powerful decided your value had changed. Then came the afternoon she would never forget. Ethan had asked her to meet him at his office. The request itself felt strange. Most couples discussed personal matters at home, but Ethan preferred environments where he felt in control. She remembered entering the glass conference room and immediately sensing something was wrong. The divorce papers were already waiting on the table. Not discussed, not suggested. Prepared, finalized, organized, ready for signatures. Charlotte still remembered the cold feeling that settled into her chest. "How long have you been planning this?" she had asked quietly. Ethan looked away before answering. "Long enough to know it is the right decision." She wanted to ask 100 questions. Instead, only one mattered. Was there someone else? Ethan hesitated for less than 2 seconds. It was enough. She never forgot those 2 seconds. Because they told her everything. Months later, when photographs of Ethan and Vanessa appeared online, Charlotte felt no surprise. Only confirmation. The divorce became official shortly afterward. 7 years later, she still remembered leaving the courthouse alone. Rain had fallen steadily that afternoon. She sat inside her car for nearly an hour without starting the engine. Not because she wanted Ethan back. Because she was mourning the future she thought she was building. Sometimes the deepest grief is not losing a person. It is losing the life you imagined with them. 2 weeks later, everything changed. Charlotte had been feeling exhausted for days. At first she blamed stress. Then she blamed poor sleep. Finally, she stopped at a pharmacy on her way home. The result appeared almost immediately. Pregnant. She remembered staring at the test in disbelief. Then laughing. Then crying. Then laughing again. The emotions came so quickly she could barely process them. A family had ended. A new one had just begun. The timing felt impossible. Terrifying. Beautiful. All at once. For days she debated calling Ethan. She even picked up the phone more than once. Each time, she stopped. What finally changed her mind was not anger. It was clarity. By then, Ethan was already publicly celebrating his new relationship. The world he wanted did not include Charlotte anymore, and she refused to bring children into an environment where they would always feel secondary to someone else's priorities. So she made a decision. One of the hardest decisions of her life. She would raise them herself. She would build a future without depending on anyone else's approval. The years that followed tested her in ways she never expected. There were nights she fell asleep at her desk. Mornings she worried about bills. Weekends filled with work instead of rest. But every sacrifice carried a purpose. Every challenge moved her one step closer to the life she wanted for her children. Looking back now, Charlotte understood something that once seemed impossible. The worst day of her life had also been the beginning of her best one. A sudden knock on her office door pulled her back to the present. Rebecca stepped inside carrying 2 coffee cups. Charlotte blinked in surprise. "What are you doing here at 7 in the morning?" Rebecca handed her a cup. "Making sure you do not spend the next 10 days trapped inside your own head." Charlotte laughed softly. Rebecca studied her expression. "You were thinking about him again." Charlotte looked out the window. "I was thinking about who I used to be." Rebecca nodded. "And?" Charlotte wrapped both hands around the coffee cup. For a moment, she remained silent. Then she smiled. "I do not miss her, but I am grateful she survived." Rebecca smiled back. Neither woman noticed the small figure standing quietly in the hallway outside the office door. Noah had woken up early, and from where he stood, he had heard enough to realize that whatever was coming in 10 days was much bigger than he had ever imagined. Noah spent the entire morning pretending nothing had happened. He ate breakfast. He practiced soccer drills in the backyard. He even joined his sisters in building an elaborate blanket fort in the family room. But Charlotte noticed the difference immediately. He was quieter than usual, more thoughtful. Every so often she caught him studying her when he thought she was not looking. By lunchtime, she knew he had overheard something. The only question was how much. The answer arrived later that evening. Charlotte was helping Olivia finish a school project when Noah appeared in the doorway. His expression carried the seriousness of someone preparing to ask an important question. "Mom, can we talk?" Charlotte immediately set down the markers and glue sticks. "Of course." Noah glanced toward his sisters. "Alone?" A few minutes later they sat together on the back patio overlooking the lake. The evening air was cool. Boats drifted slowly across the water while city lights flickered in the distance. Noah stared at the horizon for nearly 30 seconds before speaking. "The party we are going to." Charlotte felt her pulse quicken. "What about it?" Noah lowered his eyes. "Is it about Dad?" There it was. The question she had known was coming. Charlotte remained silent for a moment. She had spent years protecting her children from complicated adult mistakes. But she also believed children deserved honesty, especially when honesty affected their own lives. "Yes," she answered softly. Noah nodded as though he had expected that response. "I heard some of what you and Aunt Rebecca were talking about." Charlotte smiled gently. Rebecca was not technically their aunt, but the children had called her that for years. "How much did you hear?" Noah shrugged. "Enough." He hesitated. "Does he know about us?" Charlotte looked out across the dark water. Sometimes the hardest questions came from the smallest voices. "No," she said quietly. Noah blinked. "He does not know we exist?" Charlotte shook her head. The disappointment on Noah's face broke her heart. Not because he was angry, because he looked confused. Children naturally assume parents know everything about them. The idea that a father could be unaware of his own children felt impossible. "Why not?" Noah finally asked. Charlotte carefully considered. Her answer: she refused to poison her children's view of anyone, even Ethan. "Because life became complicated," she said, "and I made choices that I believed were best for all of us." Noah processed that information for a long time. Was he a bad person? Charlotte answered immediately. "No." Then she paused. "But he made mistakes." Noah seemed relieved by the answer. Children often see the world in simple categories. Good people, bad people, heroes, villains. Reality is rarely that simple. "Do you hate him?" Noah asked. Charlotte smiled sadly. "No." And surprisingly, it was true. Years earlier she might have answered differently. But resentment was heavy. Carrying it for too long only hurt the person holding it. "Then why have we never met him?" Charlotte looked at her son. In that moment, she realized something important. This was not really about Ethan. It was about identity, about belonging, about a 7-year-old boy trying to understand where he came from. Sometimes adults make decisions without realizing how much those decisions affect the future, she said softly. Your father and I both made choices. Some were good, some were not. But none of that changes how much you, Emma, and Olivia are loved. Noah nodded slowly. Then he surprised her. Do you think he would like us? Tears immediately filled Charlotte's eyes. She reached over and squeezed his hand. He would love you. Noah smiled. A genuine smile. The kind that reminded Charlotte so much of Ethan that it almost hurt. Even if I miss easy goals. Charlotte laughed through her tears. Especially then. Inside the house, Emma and Olivia pressed their faces against the glass door, curious about what was taking so long. Noah jumped to his feet. Can I tell them? Charlotte hesitated. The moment had arrived sooner than she expected. Yet somehow it felt right. Yes, she said. We should all talk. 20 minutes later, the three children sat together in the family room. Charlotte explained everything carefully. Not every detail. Not every painful memory. Just the truth they needed. Their father did not know they existed. The upcoming event would likely change that. The triplets listened quietly. Emma cried first. Olivia asked the most questions. Noah remained thoughtful. When the conversation finally ended, Charlotte braced herself for fear or uncertainty. Instead, Olivia asked something completely unexpected. Can we wear matching outfits? Charlotte blinked. What? Olivia nodded seriously. If this is an important family moment, we should look professional. Emma immediately agreed. Noah rolled his eyes. You only want new clothes. That is not true, Olivia said. Then she paused. It is mostly not true. Laughter filled the room. The tension disappeared. Once again, the children reminded Charlotte of something adults often forget. Joy and fear can exist together. Hope and uncertainty can share the same space. Later that night, after the children were asleep, Charlotte walked into her office and opened a secure file on her computer. The screen displayed information few people ever saw. Ownership records, investment portfolios, corporate holdings. Numbers large enough to make headlines if they became public. 7 years of work. 7 years of sacrifice. 7 years of transformation. Yet what caught her attention was not the wealth itself. It was a recently updated guest list for the engagement celebration. Rebecca had forwarded it earlier that afternoon. Charlotte scanned the names one by one. Business leaders, political figures, celebrities, investors. Then she reached the final page and stopped breathing for a moment. Her name appeared near the top, not as a guest, as a principal sponsor. Charlotte read the line twice to make sure she was not imagining it. Somehow, Ethan had invited her to an event partially funded by one of her own investment groups without realizing it. A slow smile spread across her face. For the first time since receiving the invitation, she truly understood how little Ethan knew about the woman she had become. And as she continued reviewing the documents, another discovery waited just beneath the surface. One that would make the upcoming evening far more surprising than even she expected. Ironically, the discovery that unsettled Charlotte most had nothing to do with money. The financial records were impressive, but they were not surprising. She had spent years building those companies. She knew exactly what they were worth. What surprised her was the final attachment Rebecca had forwarded. It was a private planning document from the event organizers. Charlotte opened it expecting schedules, seating arrangements, and sponsorship details. Instead, she found something else. A highlighted note attached to Ethan's guest requests. She read it once. Then again. Her expression slowly hardened. Ethan had personally requested that Charlotte be seated near the front of the ballroom. Not with major investors. Not with sponsors. Not with executives. He had specifically requested a table positioned directly in view of the stage where he and Vanessa would make their engagement announcement. Another note followed beneath it. Ensure photographer captures reactions during presentation. Charlotte leaned back in her chair. For several seconds, she simply stared at the screen. Then she laughed softly. Not because it was funny, because it finally confirmed what she had suspected from the beginning. The invitation had never been about reconciliation. It had never been about kindness. Ethan wanted an audience. More specifically, he wanted her as part of the audience. He wanted her to witness his victory. He wanted proof that he had made the right choice all those years ago. Rebecca called less than 2 minutes later. You saw it. Charlotte smiled. I saw it. Are you angry? Charlotte considered the question carefully. Surprisingly, she was not angry. Anger required emotional investment. What she felt instead was clarity. No, she answered. Actually, I feel sorry for him. Rebecca laughed. That might be worse. Charlotte closed the document and stood from her desk. It means he still thinks the story ended 7 years ago. And? Rebecca asked. Charlotte walked toward the window overlooking the city. He has no idea how much happened after he stopped paying attention. The days passed quickly after that. The triplets became increasingly curious about the upcoming event. Emma wanted to know what kind of music would be playing. Olivia spent hours researching dresses online. Noah asked practical questions about parking, security, and whether there would be dessert. Charlotte answered what she could and avoided what she could not. More than once she caught herself wondering how Ethan would react when he finally saw them. Shock seemed inevitable. But what came after the shock? Regret? Joy? Confusion? She had no idea. The truth was that she no longer knew the man he had become. The evening before the event, Charlotte sat with the triplets around the kitchen island. They were decorating cookies while discussing completely unrelated topics. School projects, soccer tournaments, favorite movies, ordinary conversations. Charlotte listened quietly, appreciating the normalcy. Tomorrow would change things. Not necessarily for the worse, but change nonetheless. Mom, Emma asked suddenly, what happens if he does not like us? The room immediately fell silent. Charlotte placed her cookie aside and looked at her daughter. That will not happen. But what if it does? Emma pressed. Charlotte reached across the counter and gently squeezed her hand. Sweetheart, people can make mistakes. Adults make them all the time. But anyone who met you 3 would be lucky to know you. Emma smiled. Noah nodded confidently. Olivia simply asked if there would be chocolate fountains at the event. The tension dissolved instantly. Charlotte laughed. Sometimes children possessed an incredible ability to rescue adults from their own worries. The next morning arrived faster than expected. Sunlight poured through the windows as the city slowly came to life. The triplets were already awake before Charlotte finished her coffee. Excitement filled the house. Olivia changed outfits 3 separate times before breakfast. Emma carefully braided her hair. Noah spent 20 minutes deciding between 2 identical pairs of shoes. By noon, the entire household was buzzing with nervous energy. Charlotte tried to remain calm. Outwardly, she succeeded. Internally, she felt something she had not experienced in years. Anticipation. Not fear. Not anxiety. Anticipation. Because deep down she sensed the evening would become a turning point. Not because of Ethan. Because of the children. They deserved answers. They deserved truth. They deserved the opportunity to decide for themselves what kind of relationship they wanted with their father. Several hours before the event, Rebecca arrived carrying garment bags. Ready? She asked. Charlotte smiled. As ready as I will ever be. Rebecca helped the children prepare while Charlotte finished a few last-minute calls. One involved a board member from one of her investment groups. Another concerned a real estate acquisition scheduled to close the following week. The conversations reminded her how different her life had become. Of success if nobody witnessed it. Across the city, Charlotte stepped out of a black luxury vehicle with the triplets beside her. The children stared at the enormous building in amazement. Light reflected from towering glass walls. Valets moved efficiently between arriving guests. Elegant music drifted through the evening air. Emma reached for Charlotte's hand. Olivia adjusted her dress. Noah straightened his jacket and attempted to look older than 7. Their eyes, their smiles, their expressions. Familiar. Unsettlingly familiar. Charlotte greeted several executives near the entrance. To Ethan's confusion, some of the most powerful people in the room approached her first. Not the other way around. Men and women he had spent years trying to impress greeted her warmly. A prominent investor hugged her. A well-known entrepreneur shook her hand enthusiastically. A state senator crossed half the ballroom just to speak with her. Ethan felt a strange discomfort forming in his stomach. Vanessa noticed it too. Why is everyone talking to her? She whispered. Ethan did not answer because he honestly did not know. Across the ballroom, Charlotte knelt briefly beside the children. Remember what we talked about? Emma nodded. Olivia nodded. Noah nodded. All 3 looked nervous but determined. Charlotte smiled reassuringly. Everything will be okay. The children trusted her completely. Meanwhile, whispers had already begun spreading throughout the room. Guests exchanged curious glances. Some recognized Charlotte's name. Others recognized her face from business publications. A few recognized both. None of them connected her to Ethan's past. Not yet. Ethan finally started walking toward her. Every step felt strangely heavy. 7 years. 7 years without seeing her. 7 years without hearing her voice. Yet as he approached, he felt something unexpected. Not superiority. Not triumph. Uncertainty. Charlotte turned and saw him coming. Their eyes met for the first time in nearly a decade. For a brief moment, the ballroom disappeared. Neither spoke immediately. Ethan studied her face. She looked older, of course. So did he. But she also looked stronger. More certain of herself. There was a quiet confidence about her that had never existed before. Charlotte, he finally said. Ethan. Her voice remained calm. No bitterness. No anger. Just calm. Somehow that unsettled him even more. Ethan glanced toward the children standing beside her. The strange feeling returned instantly. I did not know you had children. Charlotte followed his gaze. There are many things you do not know. Before Ethan could respond, Noah stepped slightly forward. The boy had inherited Charlotte's courage, but he had inherited Ethan's eyes. Ethan noticed it immediately. His expression changed. Confusion appeared first, then curiosity, then something deeper, something closer to disbelief. Noah stared at him for several seconds before asking the same question that had been living inside his heart for years. Are you Ethan Crawford? The room suddenly felt very quiet. Ethan nodded slowly. Yes. Noah looked toward Charlotte, then back at Ethan. Mom says you are my father. The words landed with the force of an earthquake. Ethan froze completely. Around them, nearby conversations stopped. Several guests turned toward the exchange. Vanessa's face drained of color. Charlotte remained perfectly still. She had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times in her mind. Reality felt even more surreal. Ethan looked at Noah, then Emma, then Olivia. Each face reflected pieces of himself he had never seen before. Familiar expressions. Familiar smiles. Familiar eyes. The truth assembled itself inside his mind piece by piece until denial became impossible. What? He whispered. Noah swallowed nervously. Emma reached for Charlotte's hand. Olivia stood silently beside her siblings. Ethan looked back at Charlotte. What is he talking about? Charlotte met his gaze steadily. They are your children. The words shattered the world Ethan thought he understood. Every sound inside the ballroom seemed distant. Every face blurred together. He looked at the triplets again. 7 years old. 7 years. The number echoed inside his head. 7 birthdays. 7 Christmas mornings. 7 years of first steps, first words, first days of school. Entire chapters of life gone forever. Gone before he even knew they existed. Ethan's voice trembled. Why? Charlotte's answer came quietly. Because when I discovered I was pregnant, I had already learned who mattered most in your life. Ethan flinched. Not because she raised her voice. Because she did not. The truth needed no volume. Nearby guests watched in stunned silence. Vanessa stood motionless. The coordinator still held her tablet. Nobody seemed capable of looking away. Then another voice interrupted. It belonged to the event host standing near the stage. Ladies and gentlemen, before tonight's presentation begins, we would like to formally recognize our principal sponsor. The host smiled warmly toward Charlotte. Please join me in welcoming Charlotte Hayes, founder and chairwoman of Hayes Global Holdings. An audible wave of surprise moved through the ballroom. Ethan slowly turned toward the stage, then back toward Charlotte. His expression revealed a man realizing that everything he believed about his former wife was wrong. But the greatest shock was still waiting, because the host had not yet revealed what Hayes Global Holdings actually owned. For several seconds, nobody moved. The ballroom remained suspended in a silence so complete that even the soft music seemed to disappear. Ethan stared at Charlotte as if seeing her for the first time. Not the woman he remembered. Not the woman he believed he had left behind. The woman standing before him now was someone entirely different. The event host smiled confidently from the stage, unaware that half the room was still processing the revelation about the triplets. Many of you know Hayes Global Holdings as one of the fastest-growing investment groups in the country, he announced. What fewer people know is that the company recently became the majority stakeholder in the property development fund responsible for this venue and several other landmark projects throughout Chicago. A ripple of surprise spread through the audience. Ethan felt his stomach drop. He knew that fund. Everyone in his industry knew it. Acquiring a controlling position would have required extraordinary resources. The host continued. In fact, without Hayes Global Holdings, tonight's event would not be taking place in this building. More whispers filled the room. Ethan slowly turned toward Charlotte. The realization hit him all at once. The venue, the sponsors, the investors greeting her at the entrance. The respect, the influence. None of it had been accidental. Vanessa stepped closer to Ethan, clearly shaken. "How much is her company worth?" she whispered. Ethan did not answer because he did not know. And for the first time in years, he hated not knowing. Across the room, several executives approached Charlotte to congratulate her. One after another, powerful people sought her attention. Yet Charlotte remained focused on the children standing beside her. Emma looked overwhelmed. Olivia appeared fascinated by the growing crowd. Noah kept glancing between Ethan and Charlotte, trying to understand what happened next. The host invited Charlotte to the stage. Polite applause filled the ballroom. Charlotte hesitated before accepting. She did not enjoy public attention. She never had. But tonight was no longer about avoiding the spotlight. It was about standing in it without fear. She walked toward the stage while the triplets remained near Rebecca. Every step felt strangely peaceful. 7 years earlier, she would have been terrified. Now she simply felt free. When she reached the microphone, the applause gradually faded. Hundreds of eyes watched her. Charlotte smiled warmly. "Thank you. I appreciate the recognition, but I have always believed that success is rarely the result of one person." Her voice carried calmly throughout the ballroom. "Every achievement in my life came from people who believed in me when success was only a possibility and not yet a reality." Several guests nodded. Charlotte continued. 7 years ago, I faced one of the most difficult periods of my life. I had no idea what the future would look like. I only knew I had 3 reasons to keep moving forward." She looked toward the triplets. The entire room followed her gaze. Emma smiled shyly. Olivia waved enthusiastically. Noah stood proudly between his sisters. A softness appeared in Charlotte's eyes. Everything I built was built for them. The applause that followed felt different. Not polite. Genuine. Emotional. Even people who knew nothing about her story could feel the truth behind her words. Ethan stood frozen near the front of the ballroom. Every sentence seemed to expose a painful reality he could no longer avoid. While he had been celebrating promotions, acquisitions, and public recognition, Charlotte had been building something far more meaningful. A family, 3 children, a life filled with purpose. And she had done it without him. The applause slowly faded. Charlotte stepped away from the microphone. The host thanked her once more before continuing the evening's program. Yet nobody seemed interested in the schedule anymore. The real story was unfolding in plain sight. Ethan finally moved. He crossed the ballroom slowly and stopped a few feet away from the triplets. None of them appeared frightened. Curious, yes. Nervous, certainly. But not frightened. Ethan knelt so that he was at eye level with them. His voice was barely above a whisper. "You are really 7? Noah nodded. "We turned 7 in April." Ethan swallowed hard. 7 years. 7 entire years. Emma studied him carefully. "Mom says people can make mistakes." Ethan closed his eyes briefly. The innocence of the statement somehow hurt more than any accusation ever could. When he opened them again, they were filled with emotion. "Your mom is right." Olivia tilted her head. "Are you sorry?" Nearby guests pretended not to listen. None of them succeeded. Ethan looked at the children, then toward Charlotte across the room. "More than you can imagine." The answer was honest. Perhaps the most honest thing he had said in years. Vanessa watched from a distance. For the first time all evening, she seemed to understand that this was not a story about money, status, or social standing. It was about loss, the kind that no amount of success could replace. Slowly, she removed her engagement ring and placed it into Ethan's hand. He looked up in surprise. Vanessa offered a sad smile. "I think you have more important things to figure out." Without another word, she turned and walked away. There was no dramatic scene, no argument, just quiet understanding. Ethan barely noticed. His attention remained fixed on the children, on everything he had missed, on everything he could never recover. Hours later, as the event finally began winding down, guests slowly departed. Conversations shifted from business to family, from success to perspective. Many would remember the evening for years, not because of an engagement celebration, because they witnessed something far more powerful. Near the entrance, Charlotte gathered the triplets and prepared to leave. The children were exhausted but happy. Ethan approached carefully. For a moment, neither spoke. Finally, he looked at Charlotte. "I do not expect forgiveness." Charlotte remained silent. and I know I do not deserve a second chance. His voice broke slightly. But if there is any way for me to know them. Charlotte looked at the triplets, then back at Ethan. The answer she gave was neither revenge nor reconciliation. It was something far healthier. That decision will belong to them. Ethan nodded slowly. He understood. Trust could not be demanded. It had to be earned. Charlotte smiled gently at the children. Ready to go home? 3 voices answered immediately. As they walked toward the exit, Noah suddenly turned around. Good night, Dad. Ethan stood completely still. Tears filled his eyes as the triplets disappeared through the doors with Charlotte. The ballroom eventually emptied. The lights dimmed. The celebration ended. Yet Ethan remained standing alone, holding a future he once thought he wanted and mourning the family he never knew he had. Because sometimes the greatest punishment is not losing everything. It is realizing too late that what mattered most was never the thing you chose.